perhaps.
Just came up with it.
Or variations
So is a
on it.
hit at the party.
All right, we're officially going live. We're live on YouTube.
On the tubes.
Hello, YouTubes.
Live on the tubes.
I'll put a tweet out.
Just
Which will...
Or variations.
should reverberate for us.
Oh.
And then we'll do a clapper once everybody's confirming that they're recording. If you're still downloading Audacity, totally cool, Ian. No big deal.
Yeah, I just got it downloaded. Just launching it now. Got to figure out how to.
So if you know where this comes from, you're old like me. Clap on, clap off.
Clap on, clap off, the clapper.
All right, you're old.
I am old.
Just like me.
That's right. In fact, you were talking about something on the show a few weeks or months back that was from your childhood.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like totally from my childhood as well. And I can't remember what it is now. Some movie, some show. I don't know. But I was thinking Johnny and I are probably about the same age.
Yes. Universally known as old.
Yes. That's it. Chris, we can't hear you anymore. I see you talking.
Sorry, I was muted. The thing that's been going around the internet where at the beginning of the year where like someone goes into a liquor store and shows their license and the person's like, oh, I can see the one, you're good. It's like, oh,
wow.
All right.
Oh, man.
All right, I think I have Audacity working.
Cool.
Looks good to me.
All right, and it's recording.
It is.
And Chris, you're recording over there?
I am.
And can you guys all hear my soundboard?
Bars and kilobytes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Cool. So let's do a clapper, and then unless you have more preamble or anything you want to tell Ian about, or if you want to chat to Chris about the content before we start.
So yeah, I'll just do a brief intro. Probably give a shout out to Eric Miller, who half inspired the show.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll sort of dive into it. I'll give an intro to the topic, and then we'll dive into it. Basically, the way I roll is, I piggyback off of what the conversation is sort of where it's leading us. So I don't have a predefined set of questions. We just roll with it. So if we got things that come up relevant, especially to Go, this is a Go podcast after all. Then bring it up. But other than that, we will be au natural.
All natural. Cool. Any questions, Ian?
Not really.
Awesome.
And
let's do the clap.
Did you bring? Wait, no, hang on. Did you need time to think about your unpopular opinion? I'm just saying.
I have one.
I usually.
Okay, he's got it preloaded.
He's got it locked and loaded.
How many can I do again? Yeah.
All right, let's do the clap on, clap off.
All right, I'll count to 3, and we'll go 1, 2, 3, and then we'll officially clap on 4.
Got
okay.
Mm-hmm.
1, 2, 3.
Boom! Perfectly
Boom.
Synchronized.
And then I assume you want me to play the intro song, Johnny. Do you also want me to play the unpopular opinion theme, or do you want to just act like you're playing it? It's up to you.
No. Let's go with the song. I like the music.
Okay. So when you introduce unpopular opinion, make sure you say whatever you say that, so I know when to play the music as well. And then just give me a second, because sometimes I'll be like over there listening, on my phone, and I'm like, oh, I gotta run over here and hit the song. So
Gotcha.
Just chill for it. Wait about 5 seconds. If it never happens, then you can just move on because I fell asleep or I had to go to the bathroom.
Got it.
I'll be here for you. All right.
Got it.
We're all recording. Boom. I'm going to stop my video now. And you can hide non-video participants unless you want to stare at my mug the whole time. And then I'll play the theme song.
If you wanted to join in, you could too. It's up to you, man.
Oh, join this show?
Yeah. Do you want to?
Let me think real quick. I joined last time and I had fun actually, but I had a preloaded unpopular opinion to use.
Well, no, we'll have plenty of time to come up with one as we go through the show. Trust me, that's when mine come as I'm going through the show. You'll be okay. You'll be okay.
One of us.
All All right, I'm back. Dang it.
There we go.
I guess I'll just be on the show. Well, it's documentation, so like I can say stuff about that. If it was like Go internals, I would say like peace out.
No. This is universally applicable.
All right, I'm here for it.
Let's do it.
Talk me into it. Ready to go?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. It's go time.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Go Time. This is our second episode of the year being recorded, at least. Is it the second of what week is it? Yeah, it's starting to.
It's February, Johnny. This is like
we know what time it is?
Or the fifth episode.
This is not the second episode. Let's keep it moving because it's 2021 is starting out a bit suspect, but I'm still holding out hope. There's still hope. All right. So I have some guests today, and I have my co-host, the lovely Chris Brendow. Hello, Chris.
Hello. How are you, Johnny?
I'm feeling chippy today. I'm feeling good. So we'll see if that sort of comes through in the show. But I'm feeling good. I'm feeling optimistic. We did manage to sort of snag Jared Sento, who's usually our editor in chief. Making sure we all sound good. And post and everything else, cutting out all the excess and stuff like that. We did manage to snag him right before we went live and convince him to join us to talk about documentation today.
Normally when you want to complain about Go Time content, you just email Matt Ryer. But if you want to complain about how it sounds, then you can contact me. But today, I guess you can just blame me for everything.
Yes.
I will say dumb things and make the sound not so great. So, but happy to be here with you, Johnny and Chris.
Awesome.
We'll have fewer bad jokes. That'll be the thing.
Yeah.
I can't promise that either.
Also, last but certainly not least, there's Ian Lopshire, who says he's like what was the joke again, Ian? Please say it again.
What was it? Like a hobbit that can't quite stand straight? Lopshire.
Right.
Which is epic.
Oh man. All right. So we have a pretty, I think, nice show for you today. It's a topic that is, I think, universally applicable to all developers, whether you're a Go developer, Ruby, Java, C#, whatever. I think this is going to apply broadly. But obviously, this is the Go Time podcast. We're gonna tie it into some Go content naturally. But the topic itself is one that we've heard from folks that actually suggest topics and episodes for the podcast as well, and also out there on social media. We've seen some talk about documentation, here and there. But really, what brought this show together, for me, the moment sort of the topic came up, in the context, especially in the context in which it came up, I was like, okay, we naturally got to do a show on documentation. And for me, what prompted that was a post recently by Forrest Brazil, I believe called Guru, around documentation. Not just reading documentation like we're typically used to. I just said that I'm typically used to, not just lookups, when they're stuck kind of thing, but really deeply consuming documentation. And this became even more relevant when Eric Miller, who actually suggested one of the episodes. So shout out to Eric for a nice topic suggestion there. Basically, his take was that, so coming from Python, which has extensive and often narrative documentation, Go docs in particular seem like just a bag of functions, documentation of functions. I think a deep dive on how to approach Go docs would be a great topic for beginners, such as myself. I've just started working on Go and have learned a tremendous amount from the show. Not assuming that everybody is familiar with Go, et cetera, et cetera. But his concern sort of resonated, right? This is not the first time we as sort of veterans in the Go community have heard of this comment that our Go documentation is really meant for lookup, not really for learning and developing sort of your practice of doing Go, right? So today's show is really about documentation in the sense of how do we consume it today? How should we consume it? With what purpose and intent should we be consuming documentation? So that's the level set. That's the sandbox we're going to be playing in today. And I'm going to fire off the first salvo to our guest. Hi, guest. You're in the hot seat.
All right.
How do you consume documentation today? In what style? And under what circumstances?
You're right. It is a bit of a hot seat. I think there's kind of two places. It's when something's gone wrong and trying to figure out why. And second, like kind of as the beginning of a project, just to kind of get some context around how the things I'm using work. And maybe not just technical documentation, but like other documentation, like policies, stuff like that. Like I try to, at the beginning of a project, kind of at least do like a overview of a lot of it.
And Chris, same question to you. When do you find yourself looking up documentation or diving in somehow?
So I think I have like two parts to my answer here. Because I think like with Go, I spend a lot of my time kind of looking at GoDoc, looking at source code, like trying to find all of the information that I can to like understand how to do something. So I think like when I am trying to learn something new, like trying to learn a library that I want to use or something, I'll like scour the documentation there. And then the other type is definitely like when I kind of need to understand or need to remember something, right? Like I have Dash, which is like a really awesome piece of software for Mac OS, where you can just like hit a hotkey, type in some words, and like boom, and now you have the API that you're looking for, and you can like understand how to use it. And I definitely think that when it comes to documentation as well, in Go, it is one of those things I think is our weakness as a community. I got my start in of all things PHP and Drupal, and one of the things that I've always loved about that community and that software is that there is so much documentation, like just so much of it, and that documentation is actually what enabled me to become a software engineer in the first place, just being able to sit down and read docs. So I think there's a part of me that still yearns for that type of documentation of just like heavily documenting how something works so someone can just sit down and read it, and it's not, as GoDoc has traditionally been, a kind of bag of function documentation, oftentimes lacking in critical ways.
Mm-hmm. So in some ways, so the first sort of thing I noticed with documentation or reference material or learning material in general, regardless of the technology I've been in, right, is that you always notice an ever-flowing stream of just new sort of tutorials, new beginner content. I mean, Ruby, for example, is very, very old as a language, very established. It's been around for a long time, yet you still see new content coming, like on blogs or videos. There's an ever-flowing stream of learning material. A lot of it tends to be sort of beginner to intermediate sort of a level related content, but because everybody's always sort of learning or wants a new take on something, or a new generation of programmers that are adopting the language, and they're picking up on new things. It's the same thing, with Go, obviously, and Go's been around for quite some time now. And we still have a lot of, every now and then I'll see, some posts on Medium or a number of other developer-related sites on content just coming out. There's tutorials and those videos on YouTube. Shout out to Francesca and Pora, Just for Fun. I missed that show. I miss you, Francesca. But yeah, there's always this content coming in. So, but what we're talking about here is, and those things play a role, right, in our education as developers and part of the documentation lore, right? But what we're talking about here really is there's a threshold where you consume documentation, not because you're stuck and you're looking for an answer, not because you want to look up a term, not because you want to solve a problem in the middle of a debugging session, but really documentation for sort of absorbing and immersing yourself in a problem domain or a technology, right? And that's the context, that's the whole notion behind Forrest's post, which is actually titled The Career-Changing Art of Reading the Docs, in which he provides some examples of one individual in particular, Jared Short. Shout out to Jared. I just started following him on Twitter. He's a very knowledgeable person. But he basically uses Jared as sort of an example of what happens when you have somebody who deliberately consumes documentation, not because they have a particular problem that they're solving right now, but because they're trying to wrap their head around the entire problem domain, right? Like, and this is something that I've intuitively sort of done, but I've never quite found the words to articulate sort of that extra level that you sort of reach once you really start to consume everything front to cover, not front to back, and cover to cover, right? The manual of a piece of technology, and I'm wondering if any of you have experienced that level of sort of ascension, if you will. It's like you're coming to realize, oh my God, there's so much I don't know about this. And Jared, I haven't heard from you yet, and I know you do some Elixir. I know you do some other stuff. I'd be interested in seeing hearing if you've experienced anything like that.
Great question. I've never considered if I've ascended before, so I'm trying to sit here and think: have I reached ascension in my deep dives of a particular technology? And I think what we find, or what I've found, is that usually the documentation, I guess, leaves off before there's any sort of holistic view. Like maybe it comes up short for me to reach that point. And I find myself reaching into the source code in order to go from there. So I think at a certain point, whatever, I mean, there's different kinds of documentations. We can talk about that. If we're talking about like the official first party documentation for a piece of software, I can't say for any particularly complex piece of software, I can't say I've ever reached that point without going to the source code. And then I feel like, okay, now I understand this like intuitively and inside and out, because the documentation usually doesn't take you there. I think it's probably pretty hard to write documentation that good, especially in open source. For smaller projects, I feel like maybe I can. I feel like Jeremy Ashkenaz's literate programming efforts around CoffeeScript and specifically _JS, where he wrote the documentation in a literate manner, which I was thinking about as I was listening back to your guys' show on writing, where you really are narratively telling a story of a piece of software. So I think something that Chris would really think is cool. I remember like feeling like that told me the story of the software in a way that I understood it just from reading the docs. And the docs was really narrative and specific and telling why it's trying to do what it's trying to do. And it was really neat. And I feel like I got there maybe with that, but _JS is a group of utility functions, you know, CoffeeScript more complex, but maybe that, but I don't know. Have you ascended, Johnny? Have you ever reached ascension?
It is a pursuit, my friend, and it is a journey without a destination. Always strive, always want.
Real quick, Johnny, I feel like your audio just switched microphones or something. You guys hearing that?
Yeah, it's a lot quieter.
A lot quieter.
Almost muffled.
Yeah, check your Zoom and make sure it has the right mic selected or something. I don't know.
Yep, hang on.
Oh, there you go.
There we
You're
go.
back.
I'm back.
Yep.
Yeah, I know exactly what it is. I have this little app called Crisp, which great usually. It sort of filters out background noise, but I'm noticing that it's starting to steal the mic from apps.
You sound great again. So go ahead and start over what you were
Thank you. Yeah, where was I?
I asked you if you ever ascended.
Oh, ascension. Yeah. No. No, that's the short answer to that.
Yeah.
I do want to give Chris and Ian a chance to also sort of I guess pontificate, is that a good, I don't think that's a good word for this, what I'm looking for here. I'm looking for a realization or coming to deity moment of documentation exploration. Has that ever happened? Have you ever sensed that, okay, I've consumed enough material on this thing, right, outside of the concept of solving a particular problem, that I've somehow leveled up?
Ian, you wanna go first?
Sure. So you mentioned this like idea that a tech project, often the documentation kind of falls short of being able to kind of go to that level. But I do think like in technical like specs, it's almost there. Like you go read like the PGP spec or like a lot of that's there. And a lot of it doesn't make sense until you read kind of the whole thing. So like a good little kind of experiment here is if you go read through all of it, just top to bottom and highlight everything in red that you don't understand, and then read it again. A lot of those like red highlights are going to go away, right? Just because you have context. So yeah, so like reading like one of those specs, I feel like I have kind of gotten to the point where I just understand like one, the language they're using, the idioms they're using, and yeah. Sorry,
let's pause real quick again. Do you have a pen? Are you clicking a pen or something?
I was clicking a pen. I'm so sorry.
Okay, it's super loud. It's all right. That's why I'm here, because I'm the guy who's like, hey, let's stop and fix this before we go the whole show. So maybe try again if you want to. That was. Should we try that again, or should we just move on?
No,
it was good. I like the point, but I think we'd like to have it without the clicks. Go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so you just talked about how a lot of projects don't often like fall short of kind of getting you to that level that you feel like you've ascended. But where I think that can happen is in like actual specifications. Like if you go read the PGP spec or something like that, where like by definition they have to get into those details.
Yeah, everything.
I think that's where you can kind of have that ascension moment. And a good exercise for that would be to go read one of those top to bottom and just highlight everything you don't understand in red, right? And then read it one more time and then do the same thing. But you'll notice the second time, a lot of that red's just gonna go away. Mostly because you just have this context. You start understanding the idioms they're using, the language they're using, kind of their ideas. And I think once you kind of have the whole thing in your mind, that's when you have this ascension moment.
Yeah, exactly. The one of the things I usually tell Go developers that are sort of wrapping their heads around Go, once you've done a tutorial, which I think the first time I went through the Go tutorial online, I went halfway through, and I was mentally exhausted. I was drained. It was a different paradigm than I was used to. It was a different way of thinking, of looking at programs. I was trying to figure out, is it is it functional? Is it like there was a lot going on in my head, and I'm trying to wrap my head around this whole new language, and I had to pause halfway through, and then went to watch some other videos or consume some content, tutorials and whatnot, and then I had to come back to it. And every time I'd get a little farther in, but I'd start from the beginning every time, and then as I did that, I experienced the same thing you just talked about, whereby things made a little more sense the second time or third time or fourth time around, right? It just started to make more sense. So, Chris, like, have you ascended?
I love this question.
Actually, I have. I want to give two examples because I have one that is non-software and one that is software. So my non-software one kind of dates back to my days in college when I was a freshman. And at my college, we'd gotten this brand new television station. So like no one knew how anything worked in it. And I joined up and I was like, oh, this is also cool. And there's this thing called a video switcher, which if you've ever seen a picture of a television station or TV studio, it's that thing with all of the lights and the buttons
and the knobs.
Yeah. So it's like, it's actually pretty simple, but it looks crazy. And I saw that and I was like, I want to know how this thing works. So I sat down and I literally pulled out the manual and started reading it kind of like cover to cover, and I had no idea and didn't understand anything for like the longest time. I was just like reading it, and I'm like, I don't get it. I don't like, what is all this for? I am confused. But after like a couple weeks of just like sitting down and doing that, all of a sudden I was like the most knowledgeable person in this station about how this switcher worked. And it felt super, super good because like everyone else was like now coming to me with questions about like, how do we set this up? How can we do this? And we got to do all of this really awesome graphic stuff that we couldn't do before, because now someone had acquired the knowledge of the switcher. So I think that's one of the earliest times I can remember like sitting down and pushing myself through documentation until I understood something. And I think that level of perseverance and the payoff I got from it motivated me to do the same thing with Drupal, which if for those of you that don't know, Drupal is a content management system and it's written in PHP, and it is probably one of the most complex pieces of software that exists. Its learning curve is absolutely atrocious. Like you will spend so long trying to figure out how anything was working, and it will still be confusing, but it has a ton of really good documentation. And I remember over the course of the summer before I like became a real software engineer, I was just reading the documentation over and over and over, and like none of it made sense. And I think at some points I was literally screaming like, why aren't you working at my computer? And then kind of as Ian was saying, like as I went through things over and over and just kept digging and digging and digging and trying to figure out how things work, things just started to make sense. And as I kind of alluded to before, like that's literally how I managed to get my first job as a software engineer, just because like I understood how Drupal worked, and it was super hot at the time, and people really wanted people that could actually go in and like build custom modules and do things with Drupal. So I think like this topic of documentation is super near and dear to my heart, because it's like one of those things that like allowed me to become a software engineer in the first place.
It's interesting. Like there's this common thread in all these stories, which I think we can't let escape, right? So that common thread is that the content that Ian sits down to consume, the content that Chris sits down to consume, it's not like y'all have some secret backdoor access to some, mythical, library somewhere where you're the only one who has access to that content, and you go and you learn things, and you come back from the mountaintop, with all the knowledge. It's the same exact content that everybody else has access to, right? Yet people would rather come to another person, another human, to ask a question rather than reading the docs. All you have to do is look online, go if you can somehow avoid the doom scrolling, but if you can somehow you'll find on social media sites of people asking questions whereby a bunch of other people are just jumping in and says, hey, have you tried this? Have you tried that? Right? And then you'll have that one person who has actually read the docs and says, oh yeah, here's the thing you need. Click here, right? Usually you have a lot of people from that basically, for example, I'll use AWS because that's my bread and butter. So typically I see this as well. You have people who ask questions in the forums or on Stack Overflow, and you typically have, maybe an AWS employee who jumps in and provides a direct link to something, or provides some piece of seemingly esoteric knowledge around, what could be happening, what the problem might be, right? So these people live and breathe that tech, but a lot of times, which is why you have, people like AWS Heroes or whatever, these awards that that are given out to folks who basically have done the work to be as knowledgeable or more knowledgeable than the support people in the forums, right? That come and provide these answers. So it's a magical thing when folks out there that are using the technology are coming to you who do not work at company X, right, about technology from company X. It's an amazing sort of feeling. It's an amazing thing to watch and see. But it's the same. Everybody has the same access to the same content. Yet, the blog posts still get an audience. The videos still got an audience, whether they're beginner or intermediate level or not, right? There's a constant stream of content. It's hard to really, you kind of have to ignore some at some point, but there's just so much of it. But that's the common thing, right? It's everybody has access to the same content, but only those who spend the time immersing themselves, right, and deeply consuming that content back to back, so you can get context around the technology. Only those people are considered the experts in a way. So with that in mind, my next question to you is, has that expertise building, right? And I think, Chris, you touched on this earlier. Has that expertise building helped you in your career, right? Like, do you have a recollection or memory, like Chris just gave as an example? Do you have a recollection that says, yes, demonstrating that expertise here based on the work I had put in, right? Maybe reading the docs, doing some exercise, whatever it is, right? Outside the context of actually solving a problem you have right now, right? That deliberate effort, has that in some way helped you in your career?
I will say a resounding yes. There's this really interesting trait about me in my career that like I've only kind of realized in the past couple years, and that is that I've never had a job where I've been I never had a software engineering job where I've been in a junior engineering position. Like every job I've been at, I've been like the most senior person on the team as far as knowledge and expertise in whatever we're working with is, whether that was Drupal or Go. And I think pretty much all of that is owed to me sitting down with the documentation and pushing myself through and continually learning, not because I needed to solve a problem right now, but mostly because I was interested in how things worked and dug into them and sat down and was like, all right, this thing is bothering me that I don't have this knowledge right now. So I'm going to go and really acquire this knowledge. And you wind up, when you try and acquire one piece of knowledge, you acquire a ton of like ancillary knowledge around it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the kind of mindset that I had that led to me being so senior most of the time, because everybody else around me was, doing the thing that was mentioned, where they just like go and ask someone to answer a question that they had right now. And then, oh, my question's answered. I'm not going to have to dig around anymore. And I think when you have to dig in the docs, you spend a lot of time like finding other things and asking other questions. And as soon as you kind of jump from question to question to question, you just kind of grow your knowledge base. And that's what I feel I've done in my career. And that's what's led me to this kind of peculiar position where I'm just like, yeah, I've never been in that like junior engineer position or that intermediate engineer position. It's always everyone else coming and asking me, oh, how do we do this? How does this work? Can you design a system to solve this problem that we have?
Ian, I want to hear from you.
Yeah, I'll mirror Chris on this, and it's a resounding yes, but kind of in a little bit of a different way. And in my previous jobs, I've worked like really close with payroll and HR teams to build like automations around those. And I was really successful because I was able to dive in and read not only the laws, but like the company policies, and just really like I was able to gain a really large context around all of those. So when someone came to me and said, hey, can we do this? The answer would be like, oh, no, that's actually not legal. Or yes, we can do that. Or when someone proposed something, like, it's just once you have that context around like a problem domain, working with that team is just so much easier. Like, yeah.
So there's a nuance here there, right? Because you have to be very deliberate with that knowledge acquisition, right? So you don't have infinite number of hours. If you do, you and I need to talk, because I would like to borrow some of your mojo. But we have finite a number of hours every day that we can dedicate to this, right? One of the examples I was given in the post I read was that the individual dedicated an hour a day or something like that, like a specific set of time, even going as far as to block it off on their calendar, right? As deep work, right? So that they would be uninterrupted in this sort of deliberate knowledge acquisition, right? Not fixing a bug, not trying to do something in the day-to-day, but literally trying to read, the next chapter of the manual, right? Which is slightly different, obviously, but in the context you give, I'm wondering, there's the nuance that I've identified there is that you might spend a lot of time getting to know the problem domain, not just from the technology domain, but the business domain, right? so at that point, then you become, if you can somehow demonstrate the ability to communicate, right, using the terminology, using the language of the business, right, something that is very prevalent in what's the book I'm thinking of, domain-driven design, right, like learning to communicate, right, in the language of the business, of the people, with the people around you. Like somehow you become a conduit, you become that sort of that bridge from here's the thing the business wants to do, and here's the thing that you, the engineer, right, who can translate those needs into actual running software, right, you become an expert, right, at that as well. So it's not just deep work around the tech, but it's deep work around your problem domain, right? Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I'd say that's fair. I almost think understanding a problem domain is almost more important than the tech. Like, I feel like so often, like a business has a need and they come to tech with like a solution, right? One of my sayings at previous jobs was, "Don't come to me with a solution, come to me with the problem," because we know the tech, right? We know that what's possible, what's not possible, what works well, what doesn't. The business people might not know that. But if they come to you with a problem, you can create probably a better solution, better technological solution than they could have, just because you know the tech. And as long as you know enough of the business to also know how to solve that problem, I think you end up with a lot better software in general.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think the Galaxy Brain move there is to be able to actually extract the problem from their given solution. Definitely. And then say, let's back up here. And you can just even ask them. So I've done this plenty. I've done a lot of client work, and clients come and tell you what they want. And then you say, hold on. What problem are you trying to solve? And then they say, well, I'm trying to solve this problem. You're like, oh, well, there's 6 ways of solving that problem. And you just give me one of them. Happens to be yours is the most expensive way that you could have possibly selected, because you don't know any difference. And so I'm here to give you the 5 other options. We can talk through them, et cetera. But going back to the conversation about reading and really like the deep work concept that you're talking about, Johnny, I want to state something that's totally obvious, but needs to be said. Reading is really hard, and applied reading is even harder. Mm-hmm. And so hard things aren't fun generally, unless you have some sort of other motivation, like Chris really wanted to understand this, or maybe you want to really excel in your job. And so a lot of us fail to read well because reading well is hard and requires discipline and applied effort, and really becomes, I think, a superpower for software developers who can read well. You're talking about where a lot of us get stuck, Johnny. Mm-hmm. Stack Overflow is easy unless they remove your question. But a lot of times you don't have to put a question up. It's already been asked and answered, right? Google's mm-hmm. easy. Walk across the room, ask your senior, lead, easy. But like actually digging in there and reading what you have to read to grok whatever system, whether it's in the small or in the large, holistically understand everything, that's hard work. And so you have to apply yourself, and sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. And I think the people that succeed a lot of times in software are those that have just powered through that difficulty enough times where it does start to get easier and easier and easier over time. And then you can get to a point where you can now critique the docs and say, hey, here's where it's fallen down here. Mm-hmm. But it is really hard to do well. And so I think it's worth acknowledging that. Me acknowledging that for myself has allowed me to persevere sometimes, because I get down on myself and I'm like, actually, what I'm trying to understand here is really complicated. And these docs aren't quite what I would need to get there, but I'm going to just keep banging my head against the computer until I get there. And so I think I would encourage other people to do that when you're down in that moment of despair where you're like, I'm never going to understand this. Actually, I think perseverance is what dictates success in a lot of those circumstances.
And that kind of reminds me of like, I think part of my background that like enables me to do this. Like as a child, I was both an athlete and a musician. And I think the common conception about both sports and music, and I think art to a large degree, is like, oh, you're doing it because it's fun. Like you enjoy doing this. It's like fun and enjoyable. And I think if you talk to really any musician or any artist or athlete, they're like, this is not fun. Like my body hurts, or I am like playing the same boring thing over and over and over again because I keep messing it up. So it's not, and I think that perception of like, oh, this should be fun, I should be enjoying this, and if I'm not enjoying this, then I shouldn't be doing it, or something is wrong, is like the key thing that makes it hard for people to do things like actively read and consume this type of content. And I think you kind of gain that perseverance not by like doing something magical, but by just like pushing yourself like a little bit more each time, and not pushing yourself too much, because I think that's something that a lot of people do, is they're just like, and I've definitely been guilty of this myself, where you're just like, I'm just going to learn this, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to like spend 4 hours a day reading this and doing this, and then that is how I'm going to learn it. And of the kind of successful habits that I've had in my life, none of them have been built like that. They've all been built by me starting off with something small that I can do consistently, and I do it every day, or I do it every whatever the cadence is, no matter how I feel, no matter if it's like I'd rather be doing something else, no matter if it's like I don't have anything. Like my writing is like this. It's like I write every day. It doesn't matter if I like don't have anything that I can think about writing, or if I don't feel like writing, or my day is super busy. It's like, no, I sit down and I do it, because that's how you really build those skills, and that's how you really build that perseverance and that stamina. And I think that's the same thing with kind of reading the docs. You don't have to dedicate 3, 6, 7 hours a day to reading docs to kind of get more of this knowledge. You just have to dedicate a good chunk of time every day and say, okay, every day I'm going to spend, if it's 15 minutes or half an hour, sitting down, and this is my concentration time. This is the time I'm going to dig in and read these docs and really trying to understand. And if I get stuck, then I get stuck, and I read the same thing over and over, and I kind of push past a little bit to see if there's something a little bit further down the line that'll help me. But if there's not, then I'm going to stay here, and I'm going to sit, and I'm going to try and do it. And if I'm stuck for too long, I'll go to something else and I'll come back later. But I think that's the thing you have to do for the perseverance. It isn't, as Johnny said, it's not magical. We don't have access to some special information somewhere. It's literally just block out the time, do it, and do it every day. And even when you don't want to.
I do have to acknowledge that if you don't have, if all things being equal, if you are capable of sitting down for 30 minutes and an hour or two for really like a decent amount chunk of time to consume content, that's great, right? Then it's just a matter of, I don't want to call it willpower, but your motivation, right? Just to sit down, like you're saying, Chris, like, you know, like sitting in that pain to push through that pain, so that, because on the other side there's a payoff. But I do want to acknowledge that for some, it's not easy, right? Perhaps it's a some sort of a reading disability, perhaps it's ADHD, perhaps whatever the case might be. Like I don't know, I don't know enough about these challenges to speak to them. I'm hoping there are solutions out there for those who struggle with these things, to be able to sort of take advantage of I guess what we're prescribing here today, right? That deep sort of consuming of documentation to achieve expertise. But I think that's something I do want to acknowledge, right? So I'd love to, you know, if folks in the Go Time channel that know of any resources or things like that they want to share, I'd love to be able to put that out there for those who could benefit. I do want to switch gears slightly back towards the Go documentation, because we haven't yet answered Eric Miller's query, right? How do I, right, coming from, you know, other languages, in his case it was Python, right, where the documentation is more narrative in nature, right? That's the kind of documentation you can sit down and read cover to cover, and I'm not saying it's some sort of nice romance novel you're gonna be happy with at the end or whatever, but it is much more readable, right, than our documentation, the Go docs, which are more reference like, not storytelling, not reading, you know, content. It doesn't lend itself well to cover reading, right? So what can we do, right, in the Go community, right, to make some aspect of Go documentation? I'm not saying let's blow up, you know, Go docs and reinvent it. I think there's a opportunity here for complementary, right, documentation that makes for a more readable, right, facet to the body of documentation we have, And yes, there's tutorials and blog posts and things like that, but there's different kinds of documentation, which I'll touch on in a bit. But any ideas, any first impressions of how we within the Go community could make our content, our documentation more consumable?
I think one of the things, which was an episode we had really recently, was the kind of play with Go system.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really good foundation to build kind of fantastically better documentation on. So I think definitely a part of the problem here is from the kind of like the library maintainer perspective of like, how do I go about writing documentation? I think a lot of library maintainers do want to have really good documentation, but I think when you look at like the examples of like what is fantastic documentation, I think like BoltDB is like a really good example. It's just like, okay, there's a giant README, and Ben sat down and took a lot of time in figuring out what he wanted to put in there and what, basically just dumping out information. And I think that's really hard to do, especially with everything that is kind of on library maintainers as it is. Like it's not easy maintaining a Go library, especially an open source one. Like personal experience, like it is very difficult to do. And I think if we gave more tools to make it easier to kind of guide library maintainers to what is kind of expected, it would be a bit easier. To kind of get that, higher, not really higher quality, but like more narrative documentation, that the stuff you can kind of just more easily follow.
So can we talk about some different kinds of documentation? Because I feel like as a community, the Go community can rally around the other kinds of documentation more so than the official reference docs. Is that fair? Or as a somewhat of an observer of the Go community and not all in the inside, let me ask this question first. Can you go collaborate on that documentation, or is that the Go team that does the doc? I mean, can we actually affect that change or not? I don't know.
Well, we'll I want to hang on to that question, because I think we should level set a little bit around what it means to produce documentation. So a few years ago, maybe three or 4 years, I saw this talk from a person by the name of Daniel. I'm sure I'm butchering his name. Daniel Prasida, and it was a talk given at PyCon Australia in 2017. And in that talk, Daniel proceeds to sort of break down in sort of he I guess I experienced the talk as sort of a wiping away of some crud I had in my eyes around the different kinds of documentation, because I was conflating different kinds of documentation together. So he clarified, he washed away sort of the mud from my eyes for me, so I could see the different kinds of documentation and how sort of they fit together, right? So you have tutorials, right? Those are learning oriented, right? You're sitting down, you're going through the tutorial, you're reading something, you're trying it out, and so you're going back and forth. You read, you do, you read, you do, right? They're learning oriented, right? And then you have your how-to guides. Your how-to guides are problem oriented, right? You want to solve problem X, right? You go to the how-to guide, you find problem X, and it tells you step by step what it is that you need to do, like the how-to. This is how you solve this problem, right? And then you have your explanations. Those are the understanding oriented, right? Those are the things that you would more likely to see narratives around, stories around. Those are the conference talks, right? If they're done well, if they were able to not touch on a bunch of low level sort of esoteric, minutia, but really paint a broad picture for you as this is what I'm talking about. This is the problem we're solving, and this is the solution I'm presenting. All right, that's your explanation, right? And then you have your reference. This is exactly where the Go doc sits, right? It's a reference. It's for lookup, right? You know exactly what you're looking for. You already know in your mind, yes, I think I've seen a function or a package in Go that does this. Then you go to Go that you look for it, right? You're doing a lookup, like that's a dictionary, right? That's what it is. So all of these things, no one is better than the other. It's all working together, right? That creates a documentation ecosystem, a well-documented ecosystem, right? So to really bring it back, to circle back around to your question, Jared, what's the right angle here? There's lots of ways we can go about this whole documentation or attempting to solve Eric Miller's problem, right? So I'm sure he has the tutorials he has access to, like we all do, right? There's some how-to guides strewn about here and there. Not I would say we can do better with the explanation aspect of things, which I suspect really that's what's lacking for him. And obviously we have the reference, which is golden. It serves its purpose. Knowing what we know of documentation and what I've just explained here, how could we try to solve someone like Eric, their problem? How do we solve Eric's problem?
So the GoDoc, like you said, is like reference, right? You need to know what you're looking for. But I don't think it has to be. I've been in GoDocs for certain repositories where there's a lot of like specific examples about how to do specific things with that library. And I think that really is where you can provide the why and the how-to. And I think highlighting those examples better and just having them goes a long way into making GoDoc way more usable, especially for newer people.
Well, that goes back to my question about like who can edit those and who can work on that, because ultimately, like Johnny says, you have these 4 kinds of documentation, right? And no single one person or no small core team would we ever expect to accomplish all of that, right? So where can we actually affect change as a Go community? Where can we throw in and improve? And I'm just curious, are there pull requests against GoDoc? Can you can you throw examples in there and they'll be added? I know one thing that other communities have done in the past have had their online docs, and underneath them, they add a discuss board for people to like add comments underneath and say, hey, here's a great example when I just did that, or avoid this particular use case. And so they're enabling the users of the language to add to the docs without being official, right? It's just a discussion underneath. So I don't know how all that works, but definitely the Go community can add to the corpus of how-tos and explainers and discussions. And so maybe helping Eric understand that ecosystem. Where do I go for my discussions? Do I go to Stack Overflow? Do I go to the Golang Gophers Slack? Well, if I have a question that's contextual and I need someone's advice, where are those discussions taking place in the Go community?
I think to kind of answer your question directly, GoDoc is generated from the repositories themselves. So opening a pull request to whatever library that you're interacting with is a way that you can, add more documentation, add examples, kind of add more prose. I think GoDoc, even though it's now being retired in favor of Go.dev, I think that it had the right idea, right? Because I think I definitely agree with Ian here that GoDoc isn't really only reference, or not in reference in the way that I think we're thinking about it. I think it's closer to reference in the way that like a manual style is, Chicago manual style is, right? There's a lot of, I want to know how to use this word in this context. Okay, boom, go here, read this. But there's also a lot of essays. And I think that's true of most manual style. It's like, here's some general information about this topic, about how to use this thing that you can just sit down and read, and now you'll understand more. And I think, once again, to go back to what Ian was saying, good GoDocs look like that. You have this kind of giant thing at the top that is this prose, that is this narrative of like, this is how you use this package. This is how you use this series of packages. And then you have these examples that are like, if you want to do a specific thing, here's how you do that specific thing. And then you also have the reference. And I think that a lot of the problem with, probably a bit of the problem that Eric is having, and a problem I've had myself, is when those things aren't there and GoDoc is literally just a reference. And usually when that happens, even the reference stuff, you have to just look at the source code anyway, because like there's just not enough in the doc comments to give you an understanding of how to even use this thing. And I think that's probably caused by two things. I think one is that we, as a language, since our source code is so regular, it is really easy to read. So I think for a lot of us, we just go and read the source code because it's not going to be frustrating to read that. And that gives us this kind of really low level inherent understanding of what is going on. So I think that kind of relieves some pressure on having our docs be better. And I think the other thing is that it's, as I said before, it's just a lot to ask of maintainers to please go write me some nice docs. And I think we as a community, one of the big things we can do is really emphasize to people that like contributing, like sure, contributing code is a good thing. Contributing to docs is one of the best things that you can do. And I mean, I don't like tiering things, but I'm kind of like, if you're someone that goes around and adds docs to repositories, to libraries, to packages, that's a higher level of contribution than going in and like fixing some small bug, because you're enabling people to now consume that and use that code. And you're making our community so much better than any one bug fix or feature addition can really do.
Just to expand on that a little bit, if you are new coming to Go, that reference piece of GoDoc basically comes for free, right? So you do end up seeing a lot of libraries that it's just the reference. It doesn't have any of the additional stuff. So like as a new person, you might get the idea that that is what GoDoc is.
I think that it's not.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be.
It doesn't necessarily, but that's the state of it because it's kind of
it comes for free, right?
And it's kind of following the example that's there, and yeah.
So before we officially transition into unpopular opinions, get your trigger finger ready. I'm Jared. The perhaps one thing to also acknowledge and consider is that it is intimidating for somebody who is learning Go, or really any other programming language for that matter, to just go read the code, right? I think we can all, I don't know if you're old enough to sort of remember the first days of the web when everybody was sort of, at least those of us who were in tech were kind of learning HTML and JavaScript and CSS and all that stuff. You can always view source, right? And everything was just right there. The JavaScript was right there. The HTML was right there. The CSS was right there. A lot of us sort of learn, self-taught that way, right? We read the code only because I don't think we didn't have anything better, right? There were the books and things like that, but I don't know about you, but back in the day when I first started out, I couldn't afford a $40 book, from a publisher. Stuff wasn't available online as it is now, right? So the really, like, a lot of us sort of taught ourselves by view source, right? So I think today things can be easier, and there's nothing wrong with reading, and learning by view source. If that's the way you learn best, great. Read the code, and the standard library, minus a few parts, is generally very readable.
The good parts.
The good parts is generally very readable.
Maybe a good blog post. Point out which parts we should read and which ones we shouldn't.
But yeah, it's. I think we have to. I think where I'm going with this is that there are many solutions. Well, no, there are many parts to the solution to this problem, right? And different things will be applicable under different circumstances. Even if you're the same person, you may need different kinds of documentation at different times, right? And if depending on the level you're at, beginner, intermediate, advanced, master of the universe for that thing, whatever it is, you will need some documentation at some point, right? It's just you have to find the kind of documentation that is tailored at the level you're looking for it. But there's no shortage, right, for documentation. And if you are out there, and I'm speaking to you, listener or watcher, if you are out there and thinking, I've been reading to meaning to sort of muster up the energy or overcome the imposter syndrome to write a blog post that's beginner, and you're thinking, oh man, but everybody's already written a beginner blog post on this thing. Like, my voice doesn't matter. I'm not going to really add anything to that. You need to get over that, right? There's always room, right, for new ideas. There's always room for new thinking, new approaches, right? Even if you think you're rehashing something else somebody has said, I haven't read your take on that thing. I've read dozens more, but I don't mind reading another one. So get over that fear, right? Put something out there, whatever form or shape that you'd like, right? Just contribute, right? Your part, right? We want your part, right? In the lore, right? Especially for documentation, as we're talking about here, we want your part of the story. So contribute that. All right. So let's get ready for some unpopular opinion, Mr. Jared.
I actually think you should probably leave.
Good stuff. Man, I like that song. Okay, so during pre-show, Ian told us he came prepared, like ready to go to fire off a bevy of just unpopular opinions. Ian, lay one on us.
It's really one that I really thought of. I think that opinion is that futures and/or promises have a place in Go. I don't know. I'm not saying that belongs in the standard library or should even be used often, but I definitely think like the community is lacking like a really good like future and/or promise package. And I can elaborate on why, but I don't know if you want that.
Oh, so you just want to drop the bomb and then run from it? You know, my friend, you're gonna have to explain yourself.
All right, yeah. So, yeah. So, I think that you can do everything that you could do with futures and/or promises. I'm just gonna call them futures now, using just channels and just kind of native Go syntax. But this idea of having like just a piece of memory that is or is not ready that I'm gonna put something is just so simple and it's so easy to reason about, that for doing like pipelining and complex like parallel things, especially to someone that that's not necessarily a Go expert, like it's so much easier to reason about than passing channels around or worrying about if this channel, who's going to close this channel, is this channel closed, that sort of thing. And I've been experimenting with it off and on, and I do think it leads to some very, very readable code, especially for things that are inherently unreadable. Like concurrency code is kind of inherently hard to read, right? So yeah, I think that we're lacking that, and I think it would actually be beneficial.
Ian, I don't believe you.
You don't believe me that it doesn't exist? It does exist, but
well, yeah, I don't believe. I'm gonna dissent. I don't believe that promises or something like it is needed in Go. I think that is something that is a paradigm, that is a way of thinking about sort of concurrency, that is a carryover perhaps from the JS world, or other sort of technologies that use those paradigms. And again, I'm not saying it's those things are bad. You know, I'm not saying channels over those kind of, you know, mechanisms. More so, I'm in the camp that I'd like one way to do something, and Go, and the channels and the concurrency primitives that we have now do that job exceptionally well, if you don't abuse them. And adding another, I always keep finding myself in this sort of spot where I'm sort of defending for sort of more of a conservative approach to the
status quo.
I know, right? Like, is this what happens? Is this happens when people just get comfortable with something and you just don't want no new ideas and new thought? Like, yeah.
Get
So
your futures off my lawn.
Get your futures off my lawn. That is awesome. That needs to be a clip somewhere. But yeah, that's I guess that's my approach. I suppose, like, I appreciate the idea. I'm just not convinced.
And I kind of feel like building features around channels and like building an API for that feels like such a small API.
It's tiny, yeah.
I don't know if it's worth adding versus just writing it when you need it. Like, I think that's kind of where I sit with this. It's like I I think there are a place where this kind of concept of doing kind of like delayed processing makes a lot of sense. And I think that is a paradigm in Go, using Go routines and channels. And I feel like this fits with the like, please don't expose channels more than we need a nice API for promises and futures. Because I think that's something that I think is kind of fraught in the Go community. Like returning channels to people is it's a foot gun. It's definitely a foot gun, because it's like, oh yeah, as you brought up, like who's gonna close the channel, who owns this channel, who puts. So I think there are some definite downsides to exposing channels, but I think just covering them up a little bit and then kind of having the same concept is definitely a programming paradigm that's useful. I think my worry with adding unofficial promises or futures type of thing is that it'll encourage people not to learn Go routines and channels. It'll encourage people to like, oh, I know this from JavaScript, so I'm going to keep doing it the way that I did in JavaScript. And nothing against like the paradigms of other languages, but this is Go. We have our idioms and we have them for a reason. If you're going to hang out in the Go camp, please learn our idioms. Like I have had my share of like that Java Go, that Ruby Go, that C++ Go, and that JavaScript Go, and I don't really want any more of it.
And I understand that. And I would be against adding it to the standard library, like, or as a language feature. Just the idea of like a similar concept to a feature as like you said, a wrapper around channels that just does not actually expose the channel. I've used it in a couple of places and it's worked really well. Yeah.
And I think there was a proposal we talked about, what was that, last week? Yeah, last week, that had this kind of like deferred processing. I think it was called eval. That is a similar concept to this, where it's like you can actually make it so a function doesn't execute unless it's actually used, which I think is a kind of related type of functionality, but also slightly different. But I could also see how that could easily be abused to make futures and put them everywhere and have Go be inherently less readable.
All right, Chris, we're leading. We're right at your doorstep. What is your unpopular opinion?
I think my unpopular opinion, I think it's related to the content of the show, but I think it's that we shouldn't try and make software engineering as a whole too easy, or I guess easier. And I want to extrapolate on that.
Please do.
Please do. I want to hear this one.
I was actually going to joke about that earlier. Like, we're making it too easy to learn. But
so I think that the trouble here is that while it's really helpful for people to have an easy on-ramp to like learning and acquiring a language, there is going to be a point at which it is going to be hard. It's just going to be hard. And I think it does us a disservice, or does people a disservice, if they are given, I feel it's kind of like a bait and switch, right? If they're given this kind of easy on-ramp to doing like the basic stuff and the simple stuff, and then they get walloped with this, oh, now everything's going to get really hard, and you're not going to have any of that stamina, any of that kind of discipline built up to kind of get yourself over that. And I think that's there's some things I've read. I don't remember where I've read them, but this idea that like starting off computer science curriculum with pointers and recursion basically weeded out a lot of people because it was such a hard concept for people to grapple with. But the result of the people that pushed through was that they had a much easier time in the long run being able to like comprehend and understand computer science curriculum. And I think that's kind of true of a lot of things that are like this, a lot of things that involve a lot of practice or a lot of, not having fun most of the time. I read this book recently called Peak, and one of the things that they talk about in the opening of it is this idea of like how do you, the book really is all about like how do you become like expert level or elite level at what you're doing. And the thing that they kind of put in the beginning is like, okay, well, if you want to become like a really good tennis player, a lot of people think like, okay, well, I can just like get a tennis racket and start playing some tennis games and kind of do it on the weekend. And then I'll just kind of keep doing that. And that will be enough. That'll be sufficient. And like, you can't become a great tennis player by doing that. You kind of have to like continue pushing yourself. And I think that in that kind of vein, by making it really easy to start up, by making it so that you just get all of these like quick wins, you just get really addicted, really addicted to those quick wins. And there's nothing there to help you push through when you get to the other side. So either you stop learning, which I think is the epidemic that is in our industry right now, is people not advancing their skills, not learning, not practicing, not reading the docs more, or you quit because you've just hit this wall. And so I think it's definitely, I feel like this is like super unpopular, but I feel like it's kind of what I feel is like some like real talk. Is like, yeah, this is not an easy industry. This is not an easy thing to do. And if we can't weather through what is necessary to acquire the skills that we're going to have to continue to grow in the future, we're going to continue having the problems that we have now with the quality of our software and our ability to hire and retain and kind of grow as a community. I feel like Johnny has like a very something to say about that.
Nope. I'm gonna pass on that one. Only because
let me in. Unless Johnny, you were just joking. You're gonna bring something.
No. I'm
okay.
I understand the context in which Chris is talking about.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I would say I agree and disagree with you. And I think that what I agree about is that we should not act as if this is not difficult. I think that's the bait and switch.
Right.
I think that should be clear and upfront that this is a difficult thing. It's a very young industry. We're still figuring it out as we're going, which means the goalposts are going to move as you advance. And you're going to have to be okay with that, because as they move, you're going to have to change the direction that you're kicking, or you're going to miss a lot of shots. I don't know. I'm losing my metaphor. Kicks.
Football?
I think goals.
All right, I went to a football metaphor and I immediately lost it. So we should be upfront with that, right? Like, this is not an easy discipline. It's going to get really hard. You're going to hit, this problem, that problem, the other thing, and you're going to have to be able to power through that. There are not just complex issues, but even just topics that are like really hard to grok, recursion, pointers, computer sciencey things. So that should not be like, we're not like, hey, everybody should be a developer because it's easy and it's fun. And that's like, it's all unicorns and rainbows, because that's just not the case. Like, there's a lot of hard work, all the things that you're saying, Chris. That being said, the quick wins are very empowering, and easy on-ramps, the easy on-ramps aren't going to stop the people who are going to make it through. Like, the ones who did really good at the recursion class in the class, they're also going to get through those easy on-ramps just fine. But what those on-ramps can provide for somebody is sort of like an extrinsic motivation that they may not have had otherwise, especially for young people, that, hey, there is satisfaction in this career. There is empowerment in this career. There is things that you can do which will give you joy or help others. And you can do those things if you power through, and we can get you started as easily as possible to get to the hard parts. I think that those might provide some people with motivation that they may never have gotten to if you just hit them over the head with recursion. So I'm kind of of both minds. I see what you're saying. Like, we shouldn't bait and switch, but I don't think that means we have to make it hard, like on purpose. It's already going to be hard, or not easier. I don't know. I can't remember how you worded it.
Yeah. I agree with you on that. Like, I think that the way I'm trying to, it's tough to articulate this well, because it is like a very nuanced and careful thing. This isn't saying like,
but it has to be a one-liner for Unpopular Opinion, because that's the segment, right?
We should. I'm not saying that we like shouldn't make our docs better, or that we shouldn't have more tutorials or more books that make it easier to grok some of these concepts. But I think you really did hit on kind of what I'm trying to articulate here, which is, we can't have this idea that like, oh, anybody can write an app, or it's easy to write an app, or it's easy to do this thing, or come on board, it's just going to be great, or like, or we can't kind of fall into that desperation of we need to hire a lot more software engineers, so we need to make it easier for people to become software engineers. That's not the solution there. And I think that this unpopular opinion is kind of a pushback against that, of saying like, no, this what we're doing is extremely difficult, and we are very new. Like, this industry is very new. We have a lot to figure out, and what we need right now isn't just more people. We don't need more bodies. Like, I feel like every company has this thing where they're like, I need to hire 50 engineers. And it's like, you don't need more bodies. You need to have more concentration and discipline. And you need to be able to persevere through these bumps that you're hitting. And you can't, the mythical man month is still true. You can't just throw people at problems. And I feel like that's kind of the ethos of everything right now. And I feel like the kind of way we're going with a lot of the material that we're creating is, how do we make it easier for people to get in the door? And I think if we don't consider how do we ensure that people know that this isn't going to be as easy as we're trying to make it, then we're going to have a big problem in a couple of years.
Well, that leads into my unpopular opinion.
Ooh,
which is also, I kind of stole my own thunder earlier in the show, because my opinion is that one of the primary traits of successful developers is stubbornness, not intelligence necessarily, not anything else. Although we can have more than one trait, people. It can happen. But I think that what I've seen over the years and what I've experienced is the ones that really succeed, and of course define success, right? Proficiency in what they're doing. Maybe you reach a level of like a CTO, maybe you're a senior engineer, whatever it is, like you can build apps, you can make it through, is that those people are generally stubborn. And maybe that's not the perfect word to use, but that refusal to give up until it works, the powering through the docs that we talked about, or through the source code, the willingness to dive into the source code and say, nah, I'm not going to just go eat dinner right now. Now, it doesn't mean it's always the best trait, but I think it's there often, right? I'm going to sit here and I'm not leaving until I understand this. Like that, I see that in so many successful software engineers that I've met over the years that we've interviewed on the shows. The ones that'll just keep rewriting that function until it's good enough. Like they're never happy with it being good enough, and they're going to keep going until they have like the ability to write functions pretty well the first time around, or maybe the second pass. Stubbornness is usually there. Now, stubbornness causes all sorts of problems too, right? Like it can actually be maladaptive in many circumstances and make social interactions and working on a team and like all these things can actually cause problems. But I think it's a virtue in certain cases when it comes to software development. And I think that lots of the people I've seen who are successful are also stubborn or persevere, or how, if you want to say it in a kinder way. That's my opinion. I'm not going to change my mind about it because I'm stubborn.
I don't think that's unpopular. Maybe it's my weird way of thinking, but like, I think that's true of like a lot of in a lot of disciplines. Like I've been talking about, being an athlete or being a musician. I think that stubbornness is required to get to those elite levels. And I think that you're exactly right in that, like, you have to develop that ability to just kind of stick with it. Because if you don't, it's just going to be like, oh, I'm going to go do something else. It reminds me of I don't know where I heard it, but there was like, someone was watching some like band playing, and they kind of went up to the keyboard player afterward, and they're like, "Oh man, I like wish I could play keyboard as well as you." And the guy was like, "No, you don't." And he was like, and the guy was the audience member was like, "Wait, what do you mean?" He's like, "Oh, if you wish you could play keyboard as well as me, you'd spend 10 hours a day practicing like I do." Yeah. And I think that kind of hits on the same sort of theme that you were saying, right? That this stubbornness, this perseverance, this like wanting to stick with it and keep doing it even when it gets tough.
I think the reason why I think it might be unpopular is because the stereotype, or maybe the mythos of like the 10x engineer is the one who like was doing math equations when they were 8, and they have like this intelligence. Like it seems like that seems to be what people think is the primary trait, is like some sort of they think like systems thinking, intelligence, I don't know, these other traits. And I think actually just powering through is what most successful engineers end up doing to get to where they are. Johnny, what do you think?
I think if you can find those quote unquote 10x engineers, the people that are so brilliant, they stand out from the crowd. And I'm not saying those people don't exist. There's a lot of literature around 10x engineering out there floating about. But if you can find those people and you can afford them, hire them. I'm not saying they don't exist, but if you can find them and you can afford them, hire them. Good for you. But this leads into my next, my actual unpopular opinion as well.
Let's hear it.
I would rather work with a single junior developer that has spent the time to acquire domain knowledge and expertise than with a team of senior developers without that domain expertise. Because while I can go fast with that team of senior developers, I am more likely to actually solve the problem right the first time with that domain knowledge that I'm getting from that junior developer. And that expertise, it's acquired how? We've just spent a whole episode talking about it.
I feel like in that case, though, is that junior engineer really a junior engineer, or are they?
It's just a title, right?
Engineer?
It's just a title, right?
Yeah. Another hot take, unpopular opinion. Our titling in this industry is absolutely atrocious.
Yes.
Ooh, that's for another episode. We're gonna dive into that one.
Oh man, every time I'm at a company and they're like, "Oh, we just redid our career pathing and our title matrix," and I'm like, none of these titles make any sense. No, I don't understand. Oh, and if we're gonna talk about future episode topics, I think I have one that I think we should really do on.
Wait, should we end the show?
Oh, say it. Oh, keep it going.
Okay. I read this really good piece. So we can probably link in the show notes about the eternal question of like whether software engineering is engineering. And in it, there was a lot of really great stuff in this kind of series of posts. But one of the things that really stuck out to me about it was that the author made this distinction between software engineering and software development. And they kind of equated it to the difference between electrical engineering and electricians. And I really think we should explore that dynamic there, because I think it's something that absolutely exists within our industry, that there is a core difference between doing software engineering and doing software development, even though they are much closer than electrical engineering versus electricians. Because I think that is something that we need to start understanding as an industry if we really want to kind of get to the next level and start kind of building software that isn't terrible, because software is terrible. And I do not think that's an unpopular opinion.
No, that's popular. Johnny, let me read something real quick. Then you can close the show. This relates to your opinion, so you're going to like this. Jessica Care writes on her blog. She says, "What makes a software engineer productive? You can list attributes like experience, scientific mindset, intelligence, focus." Actually, she's kind of disagreeing with me. She says, "Yet, in my experience, far and away, the biggest factor is," ready for it, "familiarity with the code base that they're changing." So that's in the same domain as domain knowledge, right? She says that knowledge of what the system does and needs to do is completely essential and entirely contextual. The easiest way to get it is to create it. That is to write the software from scratch. And then it feels completely natural. It doesn't feel like knowledge. It feels like breathing. It feels obvious. When you have a decent mental model of the system, sharing that with others is hard. You don't know how much you know. And she goes on to describe the challenge then of being the one who has that inherent knowledge and then giving it out to others so they can be as productive as you are. So similar to what you're saying, you're speaking more like, I think, the business domain, less the software, the code itself. And she's talking about familiarity with the code base, but that's all wrapped into one big pile of spaghetti, right? Anyway, I thought I'd add that because she agrees with you.
That sounds like knowledge versus skill in a way, which might be another episode too. I'm full of episodes.
We're just like
Johnny's over here like, how do I end this episode? These guys just keep talking.
You're just dropping gems left and right.
Let me read this documentation to you real quick, Johnny.
Pull up this doc.
I'll read it as a pirate.
Oh, please don't do a Matt Ryer. Matt said he'd listen live to the show. He might probably just jump on and close us out with a pirate joke, a pirate send off. Don't do that, Matt. Like, we're kidding. Don't do that. All right. Well, there you have it, folks. Thank you so much for having spent I don't know how many minutes did we spend, an hour plus talking about documentation of all things. But as you at least should know by now, there's different levels of documentation. There's different ways of consuming documentation. Documentation can add value to not just your know-how, but also your career, right? You can be strategic about documentation, reading and consumption, not just tactical, not just to look up the just when you need it, you go look for it. You can be deliberate about knowledge acquisition through documentation reading. And if you have ideas for how to improve our Go communities, documentation and body of works around documentation, we welcome your contributions and efforts. With that, I thank my guests on the show. Ian, thank you for coming.
Yeah, I was happy to be here.
Awesome. Jared, our editor slash guest as well today. Thank you for
thanks
being
for
here.
inviting me.
Yes, it was a blast. And as always, Chris, thank you for being here and adding lots of flavor.
Of course, that's what I do.
Awesome. All right, y'all. Until next one.
Oh, that's loud. All right.
Huzzah!
Huzzah. Y'all can
We-
stop your recordings.
We did it! Yay!
I love Johnny's like, should we finish the show? We're like, no, let's just keep going.
It's just like, oh, I have all these show ideas that I need to say. Oh man, no, that was great. That was
That was fun.
Podcasting is hard.
Don't we make it look easy though?
You make it look so easy.
You gotta quit telling people that it's easy.
yeah, exactly.
We don't need any new podcasters, all right? There's plenty of us.
Oh man,
Just
I
over
feel
here
like-
gatekeeping. The best part was Johnny, get off my lawn. I love that. Johnny's like, I'm going to disagree. Well, it's funny because you said, I don't believe you. And Ian was like, I don't understand what you mean by you don't believe me. Like, you don't think I'm telling the truth? Or
oh man,
I don't think there's examples out there.
I'm gonna use your hot take and be stubborn about pushing features in Go.
There you go. That's how you succeed around here.
I feel like those were a good round of unpopular opinions, though. Although I don't know if they're actually unpopular. I don't think
Yeah.
Oh, mine's definitely unpopular.
I feel like Chris, you're new. I feel like after having you on the show enough times now, I think your brand is when someone says an opinion, you say, I don't think that's that unpopular. Because you've said that to Natalie like twice. You said it to me today. You're like that's not that unpopular guy, which is nice because it makes us not feel so bad.
Yeah. Although I
Or
feel like
we kind of do feel bad because we're like, dang it, I thought it was gonna be unpopular.
I kind of feel like the like my opinion at the end there, I feel like if you just kind of listen to the first thing I said, that's definitely unpopular.
Right. Well, we'll clip that one and share that one so it gets the
Be
downloads.
like, yes, no, we shouldn't be making this easier for people. We're doing the wrong thing. That sounds like such a curmudgeon.
All these gatekeepers
Well,
on the
it was
show.
kind of what when we were getting into like, you have to like, it's almost like you need to have the experience sometimes to like to overcome certain things and to learn it actually. Because even just reading, sometimes you won't grok it till you try it and you realize actually, you it's like active reading sort of. And that made me, I was gonna ask it, but I didn't. And I was like, is good documentation just making it too easy then? Should we leave it as hard, which I don't think is true, but it's kind of in the same vein there.
I've always felt that like good documentation is like it's good to have a little bit of struggle in what you're doing, and that if you make the documentation too good in some ways, or what people perceive as good in some ways, that it will kind of detriment you. But I think in a lot of ways we do write documentation that people consider really bad. I think one of the things that stuck out to me was like the kind of talking about the AWS documentation as is like deeply technical. I think people would generally probably say that like, this documentation is terrible. I can't figure out what I'm trying to do. And I think people say that about a lot of documentation. And I think it comes back to, no, you can't just expect to sit down and just be able to always have everything at your fingertips if you don't actually practice like getting at that knowledge and acquiring that knowledge. I think there's like, I have this thing that I've been kind of talking with some of my friends about, Ian included, of just like thinking that we like need to practice more in general as software engineers, and that we need to like spend more of our time less of our time shipping code into production and more of our time like refining the things that we do. Like I find it a little odd that we often import packages that we could write ourselves simply because we don't want to write them ourselves. But since we never write them ourselves, we don't really acquire the skills to be able to write them. So then we're kind of stuck using other people's code all the time. I think the biggest example of this for me
Is this a Node show? Is this a Node.js show? No.
I feel like the biggest
I'm
example
actually
of this
writing
is,
about this right now.
I think the biggest example of this though is like configuration libraries in Go. I feel like there's like so many different ones and they all have like really nice little pieces to them, but none of them covers like all of it. And if you're like, oh, you start off with one thing and you're like, actually I need this part from this other library, then you're kind of stuck. And I think configuration libraries are also one of the things that's like, it doesn't actually, like, I've literally written entire configuration systems that are less lines of code than the boiler I'd have to write if I imported some other open source configuration library.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that skill building is like highly unpopular in our industry right now. It's like, no, you don't reinvent the wheel. Go on the beaten path. Like, just use what's out there. You're not good enough to write this.
So I have a blog post in draft called the Dependency Continuum, and I'm writing about this where there's like, here's my premise, is that every developer lives somewhere on this continuum, and on the far left side of the continuum is dependency hell. And like none of the code is yours. You're like major versions back. You can't upgrade, blah, blah, blah. You know, like you don't have your own code. You're basically gluing together people's code. And the other side of here is not invented here syndrome, hell, which is, they're both hells. And they both have their own like extreme problems. And some people, very few people live on either extreme. Like we all live somewhere in that continuum. And over the course of our career, we move depending on our life's experiences, left or right. And I think generally right. You tend to get further closer. I mean, right. I'm using in my own head. These things make sense. I haven't drawn the pictures yet. It'll make sense in the blog post. But you tend to move more towards the not invented here side, where you are comfortable and you are no longer beholden to run other people's code, and you've also experienced all the downfalls of dependencies, and so you're less likely to pull in a dependency. But that you can also take that too far. Anyways, I'm in this headspace right now that you're talking about. But a lot of us stay over there on the dependency side because we never actually get to the point where we can stand on our own 2 feet, so to speak, because we never dove into that thing. And how do you actually cross that chasm? I think is.
And I think that's the thing I've been like trying to like figure out how to articulate well. And I think I've kind of like. So I think there's like you have to start with like, you should write things that are within your domain space, and you shouldn't write things that are outside of it. And you have to figure out what your domain space is. And I feel like a good way to do that is to start by saying like, should I write my own operating system? Which for most people is like, no. But then you'll start like moving up, and then you'll start to get to a point where you're like, oh, should I write thing X? And you'll hit the like, I don't know, like maybe that is part of my domain space. Maybe I should be writing that sort of thing. Or maybe like you should just write it not because you're going to put it in production, once again, practicing, but you should just write it so that you know how it works. Like, I think people should probably write their own HTTP library implementation, not so you can put in production. Like, please do not put your own handcrafted HTTP library into production. That is a terrible idea. But like writing it to learn it.
I gotta go take something out of production real quick.
But I feel like just like doing it so you have that experience, so you know how it works, is extremely valuable. And then by kind of starting at a place where your answer will almost always be no, makes it so it's easier to get to like that gray space and figure out what that is. Like, once again, like, should most Go engineers be writing their own configuration systems? Like, should you write your own YAML processor? No, import a YAML package. But should you have to rely on some other thing to, you know, glue everything together? Like, probably not. You know,
I'll pass you a blog post from Ahmed Nasri, who wrote about this, and he disagrees with you and with me, but he has a lot of thoughts behind it. His stance is you should only write code that you are the only person or team in the world that can write. Like, you should stick to that. And that like really narrows it down. Like, are you the expert at this one thing? Because that's like your individual, either a business or whatever your value to the world is, like this is my space. Everything else, you should not waste your time with a YAML parser or authentication for your web app, right? Or whatever. Like him and I had a good debate about that on JS Party. But he has pretty well, he's not outlandish with, like, he has pretty good reasoning behind it. It's somewhat compelling. So
I feel like the problem with that though is that and I'd love to read this blog post too, but I feel like the problem with that is that so much of the time other people might have been able to write something that is very similar to what you've been doing or what you need, but is not actually what you need. And I think that causes a problem if you don't write those things yourself. And I think that comes up actually quite a lot. I think there's a lot of people that are a lot of times you just go out and you're like, oh man, like here's the thing that like I think it does what I need to do, and you kind of backfill what you need to do into that thing, and then you wind up with like not actually being able to get to writing the thing that you are the one person in the world that can write, because you're so busy messing with all of this other mess that you've made, trying to avoid writing something that you're not the only person in the world can write. Also, I don't think there's anything that you're the only person in the world that can write. I think that's a false like basis.
Meaning your particular team's domain expertise. Like we are here, for example, like if it was not your, I don't know if I represented it well enough. Not maybe you are the only one who can, but you are the one that has the uniqueness.
It's
like for instance, like Airbnb or Uber writing back when they wrote their driver routing software, like the actual, the pairing system. Like they're the only ones that could write that. And so that's what they should focus their efforts around at the time, and nothing else should they waste any engineering efforts on, which are just ancillary things that everybody else's can write or use. And he thinks that a lot of these teams spend times reinventing the wheel when they ought not to. Anyways, I put it in the GoTime FM chat. It's called Solved Problems. I think this is a rich discussion space and one that we could definitely explore more. But